Good morning, everyone. It's an early one for those of you who are watching this on the rewatch. Thank you for being here. But I just want to take a minute to recap everything that happened with CAF World Cup qualifiers. So if you're new to the channel, I do primarily Canadian and African football content. That's what we call ourselves, the Africans. If not, we wouldn't be that. And if you're wondering why my voice sounds so deep and ready to go, normally it does. It's also I just rolled out of bed. So we'll be honest with that and we'll talk about that as we go through. But ultimately, that's what we're going to be doing. We talk about what happened at CAF this last window and where this leaves teams trying to reach the World Cup. Yes, I know some of you are back into that club football rotation, that club football thought, but you got to know what's coming up. You don't want to have these videos a little bit before to remind you. Maybe we'll do that, but here is the quick recap. So, guys, if you like Canadian or African content, leave that like here, leave a comment on who you're rooting for, who dropped the ball this window, and more importantly, who looks great to qualify for the 26th Mexico, Canada, US World Cup. And you know what? We're going to jump right into it as we go. And we'll talk about some of the things that we have seen because ultimately that will open up the doorway for where we are. So let's start with Group A. Group A right now is down to four teams. However, two teams in terms of qualifying for the top of the group. So right now, Ethiopia and Djibouti are eliminated due to points. You can see that Egypt sits on 20, Burkina Faso sits at 15, Sierra Leone with 12, and Guinea-Bissau with 10. As you can see, Egypt right now are more than likely going to finish top two because of their points that they have accumulated. And that's an important thing to note because they had a very good window in terms of what they were hoping for. Now, what makes this more interesting and important as we take a look at what happened in terms of the matchups that came through. Now, we mentioned in our last video about this, it was all about September 9th. September 9th really does. Oh, Sega, I hope they will. We'll talk about them in a minute once we reach them. But on September 9th, we saw Egypt draw Burkina Faso 0-0. That was a big matchup in the group because it was either Burkina Faso closing the gap between both teams or Egypt maintaining it or Egypt expanding it. And a draw leaves them at 5. If Burkina Faso were able to win that game, they would have been able to go and cut that instead of keeping it at 5, cut it to 2, meaning one more slip up and they could surpass. But at this point, Burkina Faso need Egypt to slip in 2 of their next games, which based off of the opponents in the group may not be as likely as it is. So, guys, we will look at who that next opponent is, but we want to talk about the games that were there. So, with Egypt looking solid there, they are on their way. Now, if you remember noticing, we did mention that Sierra Leone and Guinea Bissau are alive. They are alive for the second place spot. Again, if you look at the grouping here, between 5 points and 3 points respectfully. And that's where the matchups in October will be very much important. Those October matchups will define that group in terms of who can go through and who will sit. In October, Guinea-Bissau does play Ethiopia, while Burkina Faso does play Sierra Leone, and then Egypt plays Djibouti. So I think in terms of Group A, when we're looking, and that's the first matchup. We're looking at Group A when it comes down to what teams can break it down, which teams can move forward. That matchup between Guinea-Bissau as well as Ethiopia, those be big, will affect it, but Burkina Faso versus Sierra Leone, that is a battle for second place. If Burkina Faso is able to win on October the 6th, that opens the doorway for them to push through. And if they're able to do that, then that opens it for them. I think Burkina missed the opportunity to really not only qualify automatically, but give themselves a little bit more space in the second place groupings. Though they currently are in it, it does leave it a little bit too tight for them. And I think we'll see that as we move on and talk about some of the other groups. When we get to Group B, this, I think, had your game of the window. We talk about match day 7. As we sit currently, Senegal top the group 18, DR Congo 16, and the Sudan had 2 hiccups in this window, and now they sit at 12. They can still top the group, Sudan can. However, it'll be far more difficult just due to what is at stake and what happened. And when we look at the group, Sudan lost 2 games, and I think they're the biggest loser of this weekend. Right. They lost to Senegal on the match day 7, and match day 8, they fell to Togo. I think that was a little bit of surprise when we looked at how Sudan had been playing. And then, I mean, what can we say about the Senegal versus DR Congo match? The game of the weekend, down 2-0. They storm back and win the game 3-2. DR Congo are starting, and I love DR Congo. I think they're a team that will do well at the World Cup, but they're just not able to get it over the line in these crucial affairs. We saw this even in the last World Cup qualifying, where they fell after taking a lead in their first matchup. I believe it would have been, was it Tunisia? See, now I have to check that. I had that top of head. And see, now we're going to look this up just to be sure. See, now I need to know this, and now we're going to look to be certain because we're not going to outquote things that are wrong. Ah, it was Morocco, yes. They started with fire in the first mat leg and were up 1-0, and then Morocco drew that. Morocco drew away, and then at home, just Morocco ran through them. And that's a team that they went over to the final. So DR Congo, they're starting to build a reputation, unfortunately, of getting to the big games, but just not being able to get it over the line. So what does this mean for Group B? So when we get to Group B, the first matchup for Group B on October 6th is South Sudan versus Senegal, Sudan versus Mauritania, and then Togo versus DR Congo. You would think that all 3 of their top 3 teams are favorites, but we saw Togo get past Sudan, and we will see a DR Congo side who maybe have lost a little bit of motivation. I think they want to keep those through. You're hoping that they're able to push that through ultimately, because I think if they get those results, that only moves up by 3, but then that eliminates Sudan then from a chance of getting the top spot. And that leaves DR Congo waiting for that final October matchup, which I'll just scroll down and show you what that is. Sudan holds this group because if Sudan will have the opportunity to fight for their position, Sudan plays DR Congo in their final matchup. And I think that's going to be a big matchup for second place. So October 2nd window is the 13th. It'll be either the 13th or the 14th, one of those 2 days. But Sudan have a good opportunity to maybe qualify for a second place playoff. We'll have to see. But they control their destiny here based off the teams they play. And DR Congo, after the first matchup, it's all about moving forward and seeing what we get. So I see you. Let's talk about South Africa. South Africa leading Group C with 17 points, Benin with 14, Nigeria with 11, and Rwanda with 11. Lesotho and Zimbabwe are eliminated. And for the top team, again, it's the same thing. I didn't mention it with Egypt or Senegal. Win and start packing your bags. Choose who you want to go visit. Maybe, have a pre scouting trip in March of 26. But right now, that is how it looks like. Now we look at what happened in Group C. We talked about the matchups, group match day 7 groups, and now I'll put a link when you're on the rewatch and you can watch that video what happened. But the match day 8, Rwanda over Zimbabwe, no surprise. Nigeria versus South Africa, a 1-1 draw, and Benin, a 4-0 win over Lesotho. That matchup was very interesting. Calvin Bassey drawing in the 44th minute. Oh, if VAR was a thing. And they're not using VAR, but I mean, lots of controversy over that goal. But ultimately, the draw means Nigeria still has to run the table for a chance, but they are running out of time, and games they should have drawn are losses. And if you're Nigerian, let me know later what went wrong in your opinion, right? What went wrong in your opinion? Because ultimately, they have too many draws where they should have been wins. They still have to fight back for this draw. But if you look at their entire, there's a draw versus Lesotho, there's a draw versus Rwanda. There's too many draws where there should have been where there should have been wins, and ultimately that's what cost Nigeria. If you want to say it's hiring Finindi George as your coach, I can see that. But Nigeria are fighting for their lives here ultimately, and we'll have to see what happens. They go, I've seen you, John Jones. South Africa cheated. Yes, we're gonna argue about whether the pitch was up to standard or not. At the end of the day, both teams played. I am coming from CONCACAF here, so Ghanaian parents, but live in Canada, so let's not talk about pitches. We're not allowed to. But hey, you got to go out and perform on it. And there's this point on this group is still floating over. And John Jones says that, well, they should have had the 3 points deducted versus Lesotho. Yes, we messed up, but South Africa is cheating. Even if they deduct the 3 points, South Africa still lead. Yes, it's an easier climb for them. And I understand that point. And that has been looming for this whole time. So I do wonder what CAF finally decides to do. We did see that they had a ruling on Equatorial Guinea where they denied the appeals for the games because um, Ensu was deemed as ineligible, and then he was then deemed as eligible, but then they lost the ineligible games where they had won, so those became losses. They didn't change it. I have a feeling based off that, CAF might just say, "Hey, we won't touch it." But they have been consistent with this. It does leave it up. And the annoying thing is, I would like for CAF to make a decision on this if they are going to before this last window, because and then for those of you who aren't aware, in their game versus Lesotho, South Africa allegedly played a player who accumulated yellows and therefore should not have played. So they ended up winning that game, but ultimately the player was ineligible to play. Therefore, what should have happened is either a replay of the game or that game should be docked. That's if I'm going to look at it black or white. Now, this hasn't happened yet. And so that's what we're kind of waiting to see what CAF is going to decide to. If they dock it, right, and we can look at what the points look like here, right? Even if they dock it, if they dock it, it becomes a much more live group, mainly because if they dock it as a loss, then it's 14, 14, 11, and Nigeria can see the promised land a little bit closer. If they dock it and call it a draw, which I can see them doing some sort of foolishness like that, um, it's 15 points for South Africa, Benin round 14, Nigeria and Rwanda at 11, and all four teams of those are alive for everything. So this group is at the mercy of whatever the group decides to do, whatever CAF decides to do, really, right? And so for Group C, the first matchup you have coming up is Nigeria versus Lesotho, Rwanda versus Benin. That's going to be the big game because that's going to eliminate one of those teams for second place and possibly even top of the group. And then South Africa versus Zimbabwe. That's the first set of games. And then when we scroll down to that second set of games, you then have Nigeria versus Benin, Lesotho versus Zimbabwe, and then Rwanda versus South Africa. So ultimately, the team of Group C is going to be Benin, who play Nigeria, and then also play Rwanda. That they are going to affect who makes it out of this group. Benin is that side. Benin hold everything in destiny, and Benin currently sit in second place in their group. And so Benin with matchups versus Nigeria and Rwanda can eliminate those two teams with wins over them. But at the same time, if they fall to those two teams, they push those two teams up, and depending on the other results, could be very interesting as to how we look at what's going through. So I'm very much curious how it should go. John Jones jumps in and says it's up to FIFA to punish South Africa. If we're left to CAF, most up will use his influence to cheat on behalf of South Africa. Yes. It would be up to FIFA to make that rule. But with FIFA having even made a ruling on um, Group E, I think it is, where Eritrea dropped out and Congo dropped out, which means Tanzania finishing second is useless because you can't catch anyone. But we'll talk about that when we get a little bit closer to what is going on. So we get to Group D. I think one of the more inspiring results here. Cape Verde on 19 points with a big 1-0 win over Cameroon on September 9th. September 9th had a lot of good games. Libya sitting with 14 points, and Angola cannot finish top of the group, but are still alive for the second place seeding when it comes there. Now, ultimately, what can we say about that? Versus Cape Verde versus Cameroon matchup has been my don't sleep. Cape Verde have been my don't sleep on team for the last 3 or 4 years. They had a nice run at AFCON. The last couple, actually. Last time they had them with Ghana, which was not fun for me because I'm like, oh, it's my don't sleep on team. Oh, it's my underperforming national team. Yay! Everything goes well. So Cape Verde with an inspiring 1-0 win over Cameroon, meaning a win or a draw. Well, really a win puts them in. Angola being Mauritius leaving them there. So it does leave this group very much fascinating based off of what could happen and what is coming through. And I love that aspect of it. So when we get to Group D, here are what it is. But Libya had a 6-point window, I believe. Libya won all of their games. And as a result, they were able to, yeah, Libya beat Eswatini, and then Libya, where's Libya's other? Nope, not there. This is what happens when we're organized. We don't see the scores we need. But Libya staying alive with Cisse makes this group far more intriguing to me. So when we get to Group D, the big matchups coming up, and we get right to it. Eswatini versus Angola, Libya versus Cape Verde, Cameroon versus Mauritius. Cape Verde versus Libya, I think, is a fascinating game. I think Cisse can have that Libya side ready to go, but Cape Verde could play this a little bit too safe. A draw does leave them in a good position to go through. However, at the same time, a win guarantees that they're on their way. They're 4 points clear of Cameroon. But Libya, a win for them or even a draw for them, seeing how Cameroon are playing Mauritius in that first matchup, it does mean Libya do need a win. And so all Cameroonians are rooting for Cisse to get Libya a major win over Cape Verde, which would then close the gap between both sides to a point each. Right now, like we said, Angola are alive for the second place, but Cameroon, Libya, and Cape Verde could possibly finish first. Though right now, Cape Verde are probably, if there was betting odds, they would be the favorite in that sense. When we get to the second set of games for that group, Cameroon versus Angola could be Cameroon fighting for their lives. Cape Verde versus Eswatini, you assume Cape Verde are able to get that result. And same with Libya versus Mauritius. You are assuming they can push through. So ultimately, Libya is the wild card. If they are able to get a result versus Cape Verde, they make that group far more interesting on the next matchup. And then we watch and we see kind of what goes from there. Group E. Oh, Group E. This group is a group where I'm also waiting for FIFA or CAF to say something. Morocco have already qualified. There's nothing we can really say more about it. But Morocco only have a matchup versus Guinea in October left. So that could be a fascinating setup for them. But Morocco have already qualified just because, again, we said earlier, Eritrea had to drop out. And then Congo also had to drop out. Note with Congo, FIFA suspended them on May 14th. That was a terrible birthday for me. So right now, as it stands, Morocco don't need to do anything. They could drop the next game that they have. They're still qualifying. You can't make up 11 points when you can only gain 3, and there's one game left. So as a result, this group is unfortunate because Tanzania, all they can do is hope for a win because they're already out, I believe, for second place. They can't reach second place for points. Let me scroll down and show you guys to give you an idea. Right now, the lowest second place team has 15 points, and Tanzania maxes out at 13. Now, unless FIFA or CAF step in and award points for a match is lost, they will sit where they are and they won't have much to move forward. So it's unfortunate that I have to look at this group and say, yeah, but I guess it's over. There's not much more we can really talk about with this group. And so we'll leave it at that for now. But congratulations to Morocco. I think right now they are, if not the class, they are one of the good standard bearers for Africa when it comes to recruiting, building, and maintaining their infrastructure and the likes. And so, with respect to the other sides, because unless CAF does something, there's not much we can really do in terms of showing what is there. And Remax or JD, I did see you, so no worries. I hope you're having a great Sunday. I hope your teams are winning. My Wolves are still howling for a win. We're waiting for one. We cannot find that. And then, guys, if you're on this live, let me know who surprised you, who is your standout, who is your disappointment so far, as we have a little bit more clarity when it comes to African qualifiers as we sit here. As we sit here. We move to Group F. Group F is tight, but it really just comes down to two teams. And on September 9th, we did see another big matchup, which could have gone and shown, but unfortunately, we have what we have here, which was a nil-nil draw for Gabon and Cote d'Ivoire. Though we did see, Gambia and Kenya put up big wins, victories. And for me, my two best friends are Gambian and Kenyan. So this group has been fascinating to watch in the background. But Gabon and Cote d'Ivoire are the matchups that matched up in group for match day 8. Ending in a nil-nil draw means Ivory Coast, Cote d'Ivoire, they didn't blink. Gabon weren't able to get the goal. And so now it comes down to other matchups. But everyone else is eliminated in this group. And so for Group F, their final matchups, you have Gabon taking on Burundi, Cote d'Ivoire taking on Kenya, and Seychelles taking on the Gambia. And that's the first matchup. And then their second matchup. Oh, that's their second matchup. I do apologize for that. So their first matchup is Gabon versus the Gambia, Cote d'Ivoire versus Seychelles, and Kenya versus Burundi. If there's a game that could be interesting based off of the teams, this Gambia versus Gabon matchup, a lot of offensive firepower on both sides. I think the Gambia defensively is more of a suggestion. They haven't gotten raised into that level yet. But if there's a high scoring game next round that maybe Gabon's able to get through, but could end up, we saw Kenya draw Gambia after being down effectively 3-1. So Gambia can score. I don't know if their defense has shown to be up to the standard, and their young players are still coming through, as every country is. But this Gambia versus Gabon matchup, that's the first window for October. That would be the one for Group F. I'd be looking at to say, okay, this one could have some impact on the groups moving forward. So we'll sit there and we'll wait and take a look at that. Otherwise, again, if both teams stay well, one will qualify automatically, and the next will qualify for the AFCON playoff, which takes place in November. So that's something to keep an eye on. Group G. Algeria up, Uganda second, Mozambique third. Those three teams still alive for first place, though Algeria are effectively a win away from, again, deciding which coast they want to visit in when it comes to getting ready. But I feel, a send off window at home might be a good idea for them. I think Guinea and Botswana are alive for the second place spot. However, that would mean they require Uganda to drop a few games. So here is what happened match day 8 for them. And let's pull up those results as we see. So you have to run it this way. So when it came to match day 7, match day 8 specifically, we have Mozambique with a 2-0 win over Botswana, Uganda with a 2-0 win over Somalia, and then Algeria with a 0-0 draw. I think if we looked at Uganda overall, they're still doing well. Akalo's been putting up goals for them, and yes, we're using this one to show. But when it comes to this window, this could be one of the more, this in Group I, in terms of matchups, could be interesting. Algeria, however, have Somalia first, which, I mean, if you're Algeria, could you ask for a better team? Algeria at this point can start packing based off how Somalia have performed. 1 draw, 7 losses, -13 in goal differential. If this was their last game, I'd say this could be very tight. But based off the matchup, Algeria should, I say should, qualify. Now, it took some ref shenanigans and an improbable comeback by Cameroon to keep them out of last World Cup. So it's not impossible. However, Algeria are firmly in driver's seats. Uganda playing Botswana. That will be an interesting matchup because Uganda and Botswana are still alive for second place. Uganda wants to try to keep pace with Algeria as best as possible. And then you get Algeria versus Uganda as the final matchup, which is I wish we could have seen this maybe in reverse, because then you have Uganda fighting for them, but ultimately that Somalia matchup is there. Mozambique versus Guinea could be an interesting game for second. Mozambique trying to keep pace with Uganda, and Guinea trying to keep their World Cup hopes and their lives alive. So that'll be an interesting one to keep an eye on. But again, Uganda have the more interesting matchups, but Algeria, 1 win versus Somalia, and they are effectively all the way. If Somalia are able to draw them, that could make their final match day very fascinating, because then you're playing for all the marbles if Uganda are then able to move through and win that matchup. But you guys let me know what you're liking, what you aren't liking. We go from there. Tunisia in Group H qualified off of a solid defensive game and scoring in the 90th, so 90th plus time minutes to get the victory over Equatorial Guinea. And Equatorial Guinea had opportunities, let me tell you that, but not able to do so. And Tunisia, second African team going to the World Cup. Other matchups in match day 8. You had Malawi versus Liberia, ended in a 2-2 draw, and Namibia over Sao Tome and Principe, winning 3. Namibia, though, their match day 7 falling to Malawi really put them behind the 8 ball, because they were pacing. They were pacing with Tunisia, and that loss leaves them only fighting for second place because they can't catch Tunisia. So as it stands, a lot of interesting matchups coming up for match day 8 and 9, well, 9 and 10 specifically. And when we get to them, I mean, there they are. Sao Principe and Tunisia. I mean, that game was a formality, I would say. But Malawi versus Equatorial Guinea, and then Namibia versus Liberia on the 1st October matchup. And then the second one, Equatorial Guinea versus Liberia, Malawi versus them, and then Tunisia versus Namibia, Sao Tome and Principe. But to me, I think the team that is the most interesting in this group is Equatorial Guinea, because they will face Malawi as well as Liberia. Now, Namibia have Liberia, and then they play probably what I assume would be a rotated Tunisia squad. And they're all fighting for that second place spot. And so I think for an underdog perspective, I would love to see Equatorial Guinea make it. That's me personally. However, I think Namibia are in a bit more of the driver's seat to dictate who goes there. Because again, there's 15 points away, and then Namibia already have their 15 points. Equatorial Guinea and Malawi there. If they max out at 16, you would need a lot of second place teams to drop points. But finishing second in the group would still be an accomplishment for them. It'll be an interesting group. I think they're effectively done that as Equatorial Guinea, but they hold the more fascinating matchups because a win or a draw hinders their opponent's chances of making the Intercontinental playoff. So that's where it goes, interestingly. And Group I. Ghana, surprise draw versus Chad, but then ultimately get the win versus Mali, which leaves Mali only fighting for the Intercontinental playoff. Madagascar at 16 points sits 3 points away. And I think in terms of the spicy and the hot matchups, this is the group that has them. This is certainly the group that has them. And here are the matchups for them when it gets to match day 9 and match day 10. Chad versus Mali. You assume Mali can get a win. Ghana versus Central African Republic. And that's away. Central African Republic are eliminated. So for them, this is like the team, the when you see the impossible thing, you have to acknowledge that it's possible. Ghana should win this game. But we also just saw them draw Chad. So nothing is guaranteed. Okay? Nothing is guaranteed for that side. They could have cruised, but now they leave it as it is. So that's there. Then Comoros versus Madagascar. That is such a fascinating matchup because assuming because Ghana plays Comoros at the end. So if Madagascar are able to beat Comoros, this group is done. But if Comoros beat Madagascar, it changes the dynamic of this group because then that last matchup could be winner takes all, possibly, depending on what goal difference is. Right? Madagascar beat Chad in their match day 8, and then they also beat Central African Republic in their match day 7. Mali over Comoros as well, and then Comoros being Central African Republic. So this group does run through Comoros. If Comoros are able to win versus Madagascar, that does eliminate, and you assume Ghana beats Central African Republic, then Madagascar can't really. No, actually, yes. So I read this wrong looking at the group. So let's rephrase that. Comoros have Madagascar, and then they have Ghana. And so they would need Ghana to draw points versus Central African Republic. Madagascar would need to run the table as well. Ghana is in a little bit better position than I anticipated running through, but they need to take care of business. A win versus the Comoros is going to be the team to watch in Group I because they'll control the destiny of a lot of teams. But if Ghana are able to get the result versus Central African Republic, it all but guarantees them. But they have to be careful with that Madagascar matchup, mainly because even though they aren't playing Madagascar, the goal difference, Mali versus Madagascar at the end could be interesting. Those two teams, I keep on going back and forth. Comoros has the games that could change things, but Madagascar could pose the biggest threat. But that Mali matchup, I think, looms large for them. And if I scroll back, what their record versus Mali Madagascar was a 0-0 draw. And so that is possible that I could go anyway. But you win away at Central African Republic, you could effectively start booking your plans for the World Cup. All right. And Kwombe says Madagascar qualifying would be a disservice for CAF representation. Ghana needs to lock in. Ghana does need to lock in. And honestly, that's a topic for something I do want to make a comment on. Just the idea of which team should go. And like to me, my response is just win. You win your games, and then we can talk about who should be or who shouldn't be. I've seen that narrative around where it's, well, this team should make it. They're a better setup. Well, then win your games. it's a difficult thing, and it's easy to say from our perspective, but I mean, the other team gets paid too. Madagascar got paid, and they're playing for pride, and that shouldn't be looked down upon just because that's how we look at the side. Are there sides that you'd wish you'd go to the World Cup? Of course. Everyone wants to make sure they get their big teams the best opportunities because they want to represent well. But at the end of the day, you have to win, right? DR DR Congo had the opportunity to upset Senegal but couldn't do it. But Cape Verde were able to get past Cameroon. Should we penalize Cape Verde because Cameroon are the bigger side and weren't able to perform when they needed to? No, these are games. These teams were given 10 games to get the results that they need. And again, I'm not going after you specifically with the comment, but it's just a thought I've had. If this was a 1v1 situation, a one game winner takes all and the team wins, fine. But this is 10 games you've given these sides. They've had time to put together their strategies. They've had time to recruit the players they need to. They've had time to get their pitches in whatever shape and condition they want it to be. If after 10 games in your group, you're sitting there, that becomes more problematic than anything. And in this group, I think Ghana are sitting well to do so. If you're Madagascar, you have an opportunity. So you're playing with house money. You might as well go for it. You might as well try to qualify because you are sitting in that position to do so. Right? When we get to the second place runners up, so here is where the groups become interesting, and we mentioned all the matchups that come through. But as of this moment, your CAF playoff to go to Intercontinental playoff is Gabon. It would be Gabon versus Burkina Faso, then Madagascar versus DR Congo. If things stay as they are, Cameroon wouldn't make it due to goal difference, and that's the lump. You have about four teams lumped at 15 points, but it's all about goal difference. And so for Burkina Faso, it's just keep pouring it on. These teams have to play as if they're chasing a 4-goal lead. Cameroon have to do the same as well. Namibia as well. Uganda as well. Benin, I mean, you just need one of these teams to slip, and then maybe you can push through. But the goal difference is really what's going to save a team like Burkina Faso and a Cameroon. Those two, I think, staying there help, but they can't drop any games. When it comes to Gabon, they've just run the table. Madagascar as well are looking solid just based off points. DR Congo should. As of this point, you would say there's maybe two teams that are there's really one team that's guaranteed because I think Gabon are going to run through. Again, that Gambia matchup could be a little bit interesting, but all these teams on 15 points does open the doorway for the bigger the win, the better it is, which means that leaves teams like DR Congo, teams like Burkina Faso, Cameroon, and Namibia in a better position because they do have the goal difference. The goal difference gives them the edge here to move forward. That's what's the separation. So that's where we stand currently, guys. We have all those sides. If you're on this rewatch, let me know who performed well for you, who exceeded expectations, and who is performing below expectations. I think for me, exceeding simply Cape Verde. If I had to give multiple sides for exceeding, I think you say Cape Verde have exceeded the expectation. However, I think you have to look at some of the sides like a DR Congo. Well, that's not really exceeding because ultimately they are where they should have been. A Madagascar overperforming. A Rwanda at one point who were in their top two, right? All these things I think are fair in terms of teams that have shown well. Even aside like Uganda pushing a little bit over a Guinea, where you thought, okay, but Uganda have been building for a while, so you can't look at. So those would be multiple. I'll say Namibia as well. Teams that have, I think, underperformed. I mean, low hanging fruit is Nigeria. Don't get me wrong, Nigeria is low hanging fruit in terms of a team that are underperforming, not underperforming. Um, but a team like Mali, I expected a bit more out of as well. I think for the team who was ranked the number 1 team in your group to be currently sitting, sorry for all the scrolling, everyone, but for that team to be currently sitting 4th and only having a chance to get the playoff spot or a 2nd spot is a little bit disappointing. When you look at teams in the group like Madagascar or Comoros, those are teams that are improving. One thing that I've continued to say about this, CAF's middle class of teams have risen, and so there are few minnows left in this continent. Yes, you'll have maybe a dysfunctional country here and there. I don't know what that means. I won't it's an easy ugh. Again, I have to maintain my branding, so, I have to but ultimately, I think that's where it becomes interesting. Teams have overperformed. The sides that you would expect, okay, would be tough sides have overperformed, right? Namibia, Liberia, Malawi, Equatorial Guinea, if not for and that's a team I just feel for. If Equatorial Guinea doesn't get their ban, if they don't lose that points, that's 3 points that they could have, and instead, maybe they're living in a such better position, and they've lost 6 points in games. They're another side. The middle class of teams are here for CAF. They're the team I feel for the most because Nsue was then deemed eligible. So then you took away points, and then you're now giving them that's unfortunate. They're a team that I feel were done hard by rulings by CAF and FIFA. But again, Guinea underperforming, Mozambique and Uganda, those are stats we expected. I think, okay, if we're looking at Group F, I expected a little bit more from the Gambia, but they have the offensive, 17 goals. They've scored the most goals other than them in Kenya, but 14, that's they need if they can find either some defenders and a goalkeeper to help them, the Gambia have the offensive talent to challenge teams, to threaten them at least, but defensively, that's what did them in. They dropped points to Kenya. This could be 13, and maybe they're barely alive for the 2nd place spot. But you can't be just no, they'd be at 12. So, yeah, they'd be barely alive. But still, Group E, that group is just a whole mess just because the Congo and then Eritrea dropping. So you can't do much about that. Libya could be an interesting side. Cameroon are only a point up on them. Angola was a side I think maybe we expected a little bit more from, just a wee bit more. Rwanda showed some promise at the beginning, faded a bit. You can't play defensively that long. And then Sudan, great side, I think that um, showed promise, but now it seems as if just can't find the goals to make it through. Congratulations to them. We'll see them at AFCON, and we'll take a look at what that looks like against Africa's best. But I think you can look all over the place for teams and sides that have formed so well over this tournament. And it just continues to show that, hey, if you're getting 9 teams selected now with the 48 World Cup format, 48 team World Cup format, it does open the door. It does open the door truly for more of these sides to start to push and show what they're able to do. So as of now, again, we just have Nigeria and we just have Tunisia who have qualified. But I would say Cape Verde, Egypt, Ghana have a foot ready to go effectively. South Africa are a win away from moving on. Cape Verde win as well. Cote d'Ivoire just have to match whatever Gabon does. Algeria are a win away. And then Ghana, a win effectively will do it for them, especially if we look at what could happen in that Morocco Madagascar matchup. And so we're starting to see it. As of now, the teams going to the World Cup for Africa would be Egypt, Senegal, South Africa, Cape Verde, Morocco, Cote d'Ivoire, Algeria, Tunisia, and Ghana. And as of today, the teams fighting for the intercontinental playoff spot for CAF would be Gabon versus Burkina Faso and Madagascar versus DR Congo. Guys, let me know at the end who you're rooting for, what you've loved, who has disappointed, who has impressed. As always, guys, I'm gonna stop talking right here.